Hey there, horror fans, and welcome to the Eric Fright Show, your go-to haunt for all things spooky. I'm your horror host, Eric, and each episode, we dive deep into the heart of horror, from real-life nightmares to the silver screen's most terrifying moments. So, grab your popcorn, dim those lights, and let's plunge into another chilling fright fest together. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Eric Fright Show. I'm your host, Eric Fright, and we are officially now in October. No matter what, I know spooky season starts in August, but there's just something about the month of October that really just elevates it to that top tier feeling that we are like in it now, and it's just so exciting. So I wanted to think about what episode, what movie do I want to talk about to kick off the Halloween month, right? And so there's so many different movies to go off of. So I was like, I don't want to go super traditional. I want to stick to movies that I really like, and it's not a movie that's set in Halloween season, but it's definitely one of my personal favorites, one of the most unhinged, campy movies I think I've ever seen, and it is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation. It is the fourth entry in the franchise, and it stars Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. And I'm not going to get too much into it yet because we're going to do that later on in segment 2, but I just wanted to touch a little bit on it because I remember when I first seen this movie, I was both amused and terrified, and even revisiting it recently, I would say same feelings. And I know that with this franchise, there are so many different favorites. And I know that's true for all franchises, but for me, this franchise just has stark differences on people's favorite ones. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to pick my favorite one and do that. So that's what this episode's going to be about. And then I had to figure out what I wanted to do to talk about, for segment 1. And so I went and I started doing research on different things. And obviously the first thing that came to mind was going to be real life stories that are related to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I guess without further ado, we're going to jump right into our first segment, Fright Files. So as I was saying, for segment 1, I wanted to do real life stories that mirror the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and many people know this, but for those of you who don't, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was inspired by a real life murderer whose name was Ed Gein. So I've done some research, and if you want to know who was Ed Gein was an American murderer and body snatcher whose crimes in the 1950s shocked the nation. So he was born in 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and lived most of his life on a remote farm with his domineering mother. Her name was Augusta. She died in 1945, and then from there, his mental state just deteriorated, and that really led him to commit it's just gruesome. If you've seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and it was inspired by this man, you can kind of get an idea. So, some of the murders. So, Gein was linked to the deaths of particularly 2 women. Their names are Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden. Hogan was a tavern owner who disappeared in 1954, and Worden was a hardware store owner who vanished in 1957. He also was accused of body snatching, so Gein exhumed corpses from local graveyards, and then he used those corpses to create grotesque memorabilia, including furniture made from human bones and a woman's suit designed to make him appear as a female corpse. That is just disgusting, and I guess that's what the whole Leatherface is, but touches on it in at least part 1 and 4 of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We really see Leatherface taking on those female-like faces and dressing up in female clothing. We don't always touch on that, and it was a big part of the inspiration for this and what made Leatherface. It's a part of the DNA. So I really am disappointed that not every entry takes takes that persona on. So Gein was arrested, though, in November of 1957 after they discovered Warden's body in his shed. And during his confession, he detailed all of the horrific acts with just disturbing calmness. Now, I'm not going to get into, every, aspect of each of the murders and more on him, because it's a lot and it's like an episode in itself of true crime. I'm sure there's one out there, but if you want to know more about that, all you have to do is Google Ed Gein, and there's a plethora of information on him, the murders, what happened there. But specifically, besides Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another movie that was really heavily influenced was Psycho. So that's interesting as well, because I didn't put two and two together, but it makes sense now when you think of Norman Bates and the cross-dressing of his mother and all of that. And there are some books, if you want to learn more about it. One is called Deviant, The Shocking True Story of the Rockstar Murderer. That's by Harold Sheeter. What is my problem? Second book is The Butcher and the Hairdresser by Robert S. Hill. There are a few documentaries. One is The Real Psycho from 2007. And then there's American Psycho from 2008. Obviously, it's nothing to do with the film American Psycho. And then obviously, like I said, go online. You can go to a crime museum. You can go to Wikipedia or just Google Ed Gein. Second real life story is one that I had never heard about. So this one was interesting to me because everyone always associates Ed Gein with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but there's a whole other one that's very similar, and it's called The Murder of the Benders, and that refers to the notorious case of serial killings that occurred in the 1870s in Kansas. So the overview is something like this. So who were the Benders? So the Benders were a family of four who ran a small inn and store in Labette County, Kansas. So we have the dad, who's John Bender, and he is described as gruff and an imposing figure. Then we have Elvira Bender, who is the mother. She's a matronly woman who was known to be quite domineering. Then we have Kate Bender, who's the daughter, and she's purportedly attractive young woman who uses her charm to lure victims. Then lastly, we have John Bender Jr., who's the son, and he worked alongside his parents and his sister is one. So the crimes were, apparently one was modus operandi, and the Benders lured travelers to their inn, promising a place to rest and to have meals. So once guests were settled, they were attacked, often while seated at the table. The method of murder typically involved bludgeoning the victim with a hammer and then cutting their throat. Their bodies were then buried on the property. That is horrifying, and it makes me immediately think of the dinner table scenes in the Chainsaw movies. But when you think about it in real time, like this family, it was a family of four, and to me, it's very reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw. But although this happened in the 1800s, we obviously Texas Chainsaw drew inspiration from this. But they have people who are traveling, and then can you imagine that they are attacked often while waiting, like seated at the table. So like they sat down, and these people are like thinking that this family is very hospitable and offering them food and shelter, and then they're attacked, bludgeoning them and then cutting their throat. How much more demonic can you get than that? You know what I mean? Like that's just horrifying. So how did they figure it out? How did the crimes come to light? They came to light in 1873 when people began to disappear after visiting the Bender Inn. So obviously, after so long, suspicion's going to grow, right? So then investigation went and discovered numerous bodies buried on the property. So when authorities began investigating, they found the inn abandoned and the Benders were gone, and a search of the property revealed the bodies of at least a dozen people, though some estimates suggest there may have been as many as 20 victims. Despite extensive manhunts, the Bender family was never captured. Like, they never found these people. This case became infamous in American criminal history due to the brutality of the murders and the mysterious disappearance of the perpetrators, and it remains a subject of fascination and horror in folklore and true crime circles. I want to know what happened to them. I'm gonna have to do more research into the Benders because this is fascinating to me. And there's some books out there too. So there's The Bloody Benders, the story of a family of serial killers by Harold Sheeter. Is this the same guy again? Jesus Christ. The Bender Family, which is the story of America's notorious serial killers by John H. Balzinger. And then obviously you can look them up on Wikipedia or just type it in to get whatever information you can find. But obviously when you're on the internet, take everything with a grain of salt. But anyway, those are some real life stories based on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that if piques any of your interest and you want to discover more, those are the resources that you can do it. But on like a strange and bizarre level for me, I can relate to the chaos of the Texas Chainsaw family with my own family. Like, I know we weren't crazy cannibalistic murderers, but we were the unhinged family on the block. Like, my parents had nightly arguments that were brutal, loud, and terrifying because it almost always turned physical. So, like, whether it was my dad choking my mom unconscious or my mother throwing knives and hammers, the fights were never small. And we lived in an urban city, so the neighbors were extremely close, and while never getting involved directly, would often call the police if they thought things were escalating too far. So I guess the reason that I'm sharing that with you is because there was a real chance that growing up in this environment, I could have become a monster like these people in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like Ed Gein, like the Benders. When you're exposed to that kind of environment, it can create these things that happen to people. So I think I'm very grateful that I went in a different direction of empathy and not in a murderous, crazy kind of destructive manner. Obviously I've had dark days and I've had struggles, but even through all of their flaws, I still think both my mother and father still try to give us some type of normal childhood when they weren't fighting. And I think that's what really saved me and my sisters, is that it's not that my parents had ill will towards us. They just didn't like each other. And throughout that, we were just collateral damage. If there are, I guess, want to say love-hate dynamic. And I think it's a perfect example of people who think it's better to stay in relationships with their partner for the sake of the children when neither of them are really happy. It's never a good idea. I know it's probably difficult when kids are younger and they start feeling like they did something wrong or that it was their fault, but there are ways that you can go about that to make sure that they realize that they're still loved by both parents and that there's going to be changes, rather than avoiding that and keeping them in that toxic environment of two parents who are completely unhappy in that situation. It's just never worth it. And that's my personal opinion to put out there as a child who lived through that. But so much heavy, heavy, heavy stuff we're talking about here. And now I want to make it a little bit lighter by moving on to segment 2, Featured Fright. Attention horror fans, I am thrilled to announce my collaboration with the legendary Fangoria. Whether you're a die-hard horror fanatic or you just love a good scare, Fangoria's got you covered with the best in horror news, features, and collectibles. And guess what? As a special treat for my listeners, you can now get 20% off your entire order at Fangoria.com. Just use promo code The Eric Fright Show at checkout. Don't miss out on this killer deal. Stock up on all things horror and join the frightful fun. Stay spooky, my friends. Now, back to the show. As we said, this is about Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation, and I'm very excited to jump into this next part of segment 2 and getting into the thick of everything because, like I said, this is just such a fun movie, and I really can't wait to dive in. Starting off with, our plot rating from IMDb Guys, this is fucking sad. It's a 3.3 out of 10 and an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. And then again, I think I've said this multiple times. I don't really pay attention to what the ratings are of movies. I just think it's hilarious to hear and see critical ratings from these popular sites. Not that I think that you should pay attention to them. I just think it's hilarious. So moving on to the characters, first up we have Jenny, who is played by Renee Zellweger, who I just love and can't believe that she was in in this. And nobody talks about Jenny as a final girl, and I just love it that she is definitely in the ranks of that, and we need to give more respect on her name. But anyway, Jenny is a well-rounded character whose development from an average high school student to a determined survivor adds depth to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Renee's portrayal brings authenticity and emotional nuance to the role, making her a memorable and significant character in the film. And that's what I mean. We don't say enough about her. Next up, we have Vilmer, who is played by none other than Matthew McConaughey. The fact that we have Renee and Matthew, who are, in my opinion, rom-com stars in a horror movie of 1995. A lot of people get their start in horror movies, but this was just... I will say that these two save this film. I think that's why I love it so much. But anyway, Vilmer is described as a deeply disturbing character whose blend of sadism, unpredictability, and charismatic menace makes him a standout villain in this movie. And he is probably my favorite family member out of them all, aside from Leatherface, which is the next character, who is Leatherface. And in this one, he is played by Robert Jacks. And in this version of Leatherface, he's I guess a multifaceted character who combines elements of terror and vulnerability, because he has childlike behavior, and the way that he depends on his family is very different than his extremely brutal actions, right? So it's both that you can give pity to him, but he's also terrifying and you should be afraid of him. And that's not always easily done in these films. He's either he's usually the terrifying main antagonist, right? But when you really watch these movies, it's not always true. It's more the family. Next character is Darla, who was played by Toni Parensky. I love frickin' Darla. She's a captivating and multifaceted character who she brings charm but manipulation, and she's very darkly comedic. She's got a seductive, deceptive nature, and she's got I don't know, the way that she is so calm. It's a normal day at work for her is, I think, what stands out most to me about Darla. Next we have W.E. Slaughter. I don't know. He's just fucking weird. He is very eccentric but unsettling, who uses his obsession with quotations to create a facade of culture and intellect. But for me, it was a no with the quotations. His constant quotations were more of an annoyance to me than anything else. Now we're going into more of the non-family members, the survivors, or not survivors, but the victims. We have Heather, who's played by Lisa Marie Newmeyer. Let me just tell you, Heather is a superficial prom queen, and I don't know how else to explain her, but she is so fucking annoying. It's just, I just couldn't get down with Heather at all. Then we have fucking Sean, right? Sean is supposedly a courageous and protective character who's supposed to embody friendship and loyalty, but it didn't hit for me. It just didn't. And Sean, I'm sorry, was played by John Harrison. Then we have Barry, played by Tyler Shea Khan, and he is the fucking arrogant, self-centered character of this movie. He's your typical high school jock, and the comments and commentary that come out of this guy's mouth is cringy. It's so cringy. I hate him so much. But this movie wouldn't be the campy, dumbass movie it is without Heather and Barry. Mostly. The rest of it is the unhinged part, but the dumbness of it is definitely carried a lot by Heather and Barry to me. And and maybe WE. They're something else. I'll say that, and then we'll leave it at that. But those are the characters, the main characters that we have in Next Generation. Let's get into the themes. These themes are gonna be. I just we're gonna get into the themes because they're something else. First theme is clearly, like I keep saying, it's madness and insanity. So the Sawyer family, definitely Vilmer and Leatherface, they are pure madness. Their violent and erratic behavior is highlighted. It just highlights the theme of insanity, showing just how deeply deranged they are. And I want to go really bit further with this with Vilmer. I want to know how McConaughey prepared for this role and how he recovered after filming this movie, because he did a perfect job at portraying a unhinged madman. And like, I don't know how you get into that mind space and then get back out for it. Like, I wonder what he did to get back out of that. And then we also have the unpredictable horror of it, right? Because like, the nature of their actions also is just like creates this atmosphere where anything can happen, emphasizing the chaos and the unpredictability of insanity. We have another theme though that's going to be identity and transformation, and we're going to talk about first Leatherface's transformations, particularly his mask. He uses different masks. Leatherface uses different masks as a representation to struggle with his identity and transformation. Like, each mask signifies a different persona, highlighting themes of hidden identities and the transformation of the self. We see him, my favorite look in this movie of him is when he's got the black wig on with the woman's face and like the black lingerie kind of robe, and he's like putting lipstick on in the mirror. Like, it's just very very weird and different. But then we also have Jenny's transformation, where she really undergoes a significant transformation from like a passive high school student to a resourceful survivor. I mean, she really was like allowing Barry and everyone to just talk down to her, and she's just like, whatever. Like, she's not like, she's responds back, but once Vilmer really starts getting to her, she fights back for herself. Another theme is violence and brutality. It is graphic violence in this movie, and like intense, which we are used to for the Chainsaw series, but it it's very shocking to audience watching the family's actions. Like, there are so many different things that are going on at once that we were witnessing as an audience member, and you can't help but get sucked in, and just your face is probably twisted and distorted at the thought of it, which moves into like the psychological and physical torture of both the victims as well as, I think, audience members, because your body tenses up. You're witnessing these horrific acts. It's not just a mass killer killing you with a chainsaw or something, which is terrible, but it's just the torture of victims as well, and like what they're doing to them leading up to it. It's almost like they're tenderizing their meat, you know? Then we have themes of power and control, particularly Vilmer. He is definitely a representation of power and control. He has dominance over the family. He has sadistic control over his victims, and he just is like, when he doesn't have the control, he really is even more unhinged, and he's such a narcissist. Then we have like the oppression from the victims, right? Their struggle to escape the control of the Sawyer family emphasizes the theme of oppression and the fight for freedom from them, and it's interesting to watch. And then we have a theme of the breakdown of normalcy, right? So it's the subversion of everyday life, where we begin with typical high school proms and normal teenage life, which changes to the horrific events that follow, breaking down the normalcy into the chaos and the fragility of the safety and danger that ensues. And so that there's a stark contrast between mundane aspects of these characters and then the extreme horror that they go through. And then we have the theme of survival and resilience, right? Jenny is very resilient and determined to survive. Even under the worst circumstances where it doesn't look like she's going to get out, she's still trying to fight for survival no matter what. Then we have a theme of macabre and grotesque. Goes without saying for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's always grotesque imagery filled with like his mask, the twisted home with the bones and the skin everywhere. There's also though within that the dark humor that is always woven into the film, right? Through characters like Darla and WE, which adds a little bit layer of the grotesque and macabre nature of the story because it's like it the light, like I said, the lightheartedness of it, where it's just like everyday life for Darla is just so weird. And then the final theme that we see, which is critiquing the authority, where the film really hints at a broader conspiracy involving Vilmer and a mysterious organization, which suggests the hidden power structures, right? Adding a layer of paranoia and distrust in the power, which my personal thing with that is I didn't think we needed the weird power people. I don't know who those men in the organizations were, but I didn't feel like we needed that. The movie really ran. That's when the movie really just went off the rails. I mean, the movie's crazy enough as it is, but it really just took it to a whole other level that we never needed to go to. But like this movie will always be, regardless, it's always going to be special to me because it was the first Texas Chainsaw movie I ever saw. So I watched it up in my sister's room, and like I said, I was terrified, but also like thought it was hilarious at the same time because this level of ridiculousness in the movie, I don't think has ever been matched to anything else I've seen. And even though Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey never really embraced the movie for the longest time, their performances in this were a sign of the stars that they were going to become. They were on screen. Nothing else mattered in this movie. Changed. The movie changed because their performances were so captivating. The I can't even really put into words watching those two together in this movie. It was unlike anyone else in this film. I mean, I like Darla a lot too because she sold Crazy Girlfriend pretty good to me, but I also really enjoyed this version of Leatherface the most to me. He was controlled by the family, but still crazy and scary and brutal. So I think I I like this version the most, especially because they brought back the cross-dressing aspect of him, and his family accepted him for that, right? I know they're all crazy, but none of them cared that he liked to dress like a woman, even if it was women's skin and faces and hair and stuff. But like, they were like, my brother wants your face, so that's what we're gonna do. Like, they didn't care. They weren't like, no, you can't have a woman's face. You're gonna have a man's face. They were not. They were not homophobic. They didn't give a fuck. They were like, okay. Again, take it with a grain of salt. They were fucking crazy, but they weren't homophobic. I'll tell you that. um, I'm not going to sit here though and pretend that it's some like acclaimed masterpiece. The supporting characters in this were really bad in a bad way, and like I said, outside of Renee and Matthew, everyone else was pretty forgettable. Especially the weird secret CIA men. It just didn't need to happen. But let's talk lastly before we move on to the next segment about my favorite kill. My favorite kill in this movie is Vilmer's death. They fucking hit him with a plane. That's what I mean. Like a plane, and then Leatherface screaming. It was just the level of stupidity that we didn't know we needed. But we're gonna move on to the next segment now, which is segment 3, Frightful Facts. All right, now we're going to get into some frightful facts about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. Fact 1, which is about the title confusion. So the movie was originally called The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre when it premiered at South by Southwest in 1995, but then it was later re-released as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation in 1997. That fact is provided by IMDb. Our next fact comes in over from Bloody Disgusting, and that is that Matthew McConaughey's character Vilmer wears a unique and menacing leg brace, adding to his menacing and eccentric appearance. This costume choice was a key aspect of his unsettling presence. Third fact that we get is from Rotten Tomatoes, and that is that the release of the film was delayed due to legal battles and distribution issues, and that was partly because of Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey's careers had taken off by the time the film was set for release, and their agents reportedly tried to block its release to avoid negative impacts on their careers. Fact 4 from Dread Central is the film was directed by Kim Henkel, who co-wrote the original The Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Tobe Hooper. So this connection to the original film added a layer of authenticity, even though the movie took a different tone and direction. Fright Fact 5 from Slash Film is the film received largely negative reviews from critics and audiences alike. It was criticized for its campy tone and over-the-top performances, which were seen as a departure from the gritty realism of the original. Fact 6 from The Guardian is the movie was made on a relatively small budget of around $600,000. This limited budget impacted various aspects of the production, including special effects and set design. Fact 7 from Screen Rant is Matthew McConaughey took his role as Vilmer very seriously and used method acting techniques to get into character. His intense performance as the sadistic family member is often cited as one of the most memorable aspects of the film. Moving on to Fact 8, we get from Film School Rejects is the film's cinematography was influenced by the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In terms of creating a gritty and unsettling atmosphere, the movie uses a mix of handheld camera work and unconventional framing to enhance the feeling of chaos and discomfort. Fact 9 we get from Cinema Blend, which is the film features a cast of over-the-top characters, including Darla, played by Tony Porensky, who adds a touch of dark humor and seduction to the mix. These exaggerated characters contribute to the film's campy tone. And finishing off Frightful Facts is Fact 10 we get from Horror Freak News, which is despite its initial negative reception, the film has developed a cult following over the years. Fans of the series and those interested in early careers of Zellweger and McConaughey often seek it out. And that is the end of the Frightful Facts segment and bringing us to our final segment of this episode, Fright Picks. So I was like, what movies do I think relate to Texas Chainsaw-esque kind of movies? So for the first Fright Pick, I absolutely had to recommend the original 1974 The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, whose plot is 5 friends head out to a rural Texas to visit the grave of a grandfather. On the way, they stumble across what appears to be a deserted house, only to discover something sinister within, something armed with a chainsaw. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is streaming on Peacock. The next one is House of a Thousand Corpses from 2003. That plot is 2 young couples traveling across the backwoods of Texas, searching for urban legends of murder, end up as prisoners of a bizarre and sadistic backwater family of a serial killer. House of a Thousand Corpses is on Prime. Fright Pick 3 is Wrong Turn from 2003. And that plot is Chris and a group of 5 friends are left stranded deep in the middle of the woods after their cars collide. As they venture deeper into the woods, they face an uncertain and blood-curdling fate. Wrong Turn is available to rent from Apple. Fright Pick 4 is Terrifier 2 from 2022. And that plot is after being resurrected by a sinister entity, Art the Clown returns to the timid town of Miles County, where he targets a teenage girl and her younger brother on Halloween night. Terrifier 2 is on Peacock. And for the final Fright Pick of the week, It is X from 2022. That plot is in 1979, a group of young filmmakers set out to make an adult film in rural Texas farm. But when their reclusive, elderly hosts catch them in the act, the crew find themselves fighting for their lives, and X is streaming on Netflix. I thought that these 5 films, especially X, House of a Thousand Corpses, they are very unhinged and they give you that feeling of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I thought that this was a really great way to continue the theme of this week. But that concludes this episode of the Eric Fright Show. I hope you all enjoyed it. Stay safe, stay spooky. Until next time, bye. That's a wrap on this episode of the Eric Fright Show. Thanks for tuning in and letting me share my love of horror with you. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps me reach more horror fans like you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and until next time, stay spooky and keep it frightening.